One important thing to understand about humans and primates is that we change throughout our life. While this doesn't represent evolution, it's still something important for our understanding of evolution. For example, we're not born into our adult forms. We're born as infants, we pass through childhood, eventually into adolescence, and eventually into adulthood, and even later adulthood. Primates in general go through these same kind of periods. Studying the development of humans throughout their life is what we refer to as life history. Humans and primates share a common developmental pattern throughout life. We can illustrate this at a first level by thinking about simply growth and how humans and primates tend to grow throughout their life. So primates and humans both tend to have just single births. So they devote a lot of resources to that single birth. And at the time of birth, if we use that birth as the starting point here on our axis and think about the pace of growth, basically how rapidly individuals are growing at that time, when new babies are born, they grow very, very quickly at first. And over time, over the first few months, that begins to slow down and they enter into childhood. Most humans, or most primates I should say, and humans have an adolescent growth spurt at some point where they begin to grow faster again, and then growth gradually peters out as you enter into adulthood. So that this growth curve through life is fairly characteristic of primates in general, although primates differ into how much of an adolescent growth spurt they have, whether males and females both have an adolescent growth spurt, and the exact timing of these events. For example, childhood in humans is very extended, and in general in apes, childhood is also quite extended. One of the things that distinguishes humans and apes from the rest of the primates is how much energy and how much value we devote toward childhood. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, this might not make a lot of sense. You might think it would be better to be born and simply immediately reproduce and produce lots of offspring. However, part of what characterizes the adaptation of higher primates, including humans, is valuing a lot of energy towards childhood. Childhood is a period where we develop a lot of complexity and potential. We learn things. We learn how to communicate with other social creatures. We develop complex social behaviors. These, it turns out, are all very important for the overall pattern of survival and reproduction that we see in the primates. If we think about humans relative to the other primates, humans tend to have very dependent offspring. When we're born, we're not capable of doing many things. However, we grow very, very rapidly those first several months and even those first several years. Especially our brain, actually. Our brain, because it eventually ends up so large, does a lot of development during that early phase of our growth period. We have a very clearly established adolescent growth spurt after this extended childhood period, but even then we continue to develop and mature until basically late teenage or early 20s usually. Usually our skeleton has stopped growing by the time we're about 20. Sometimes a little bit earlier than that, sometimes a little bit later than that. Now, if we think about human growth and development, it's important because it allows us to understand actually the individual age of specific fossils within the fossil record, especially subadult individuals. By knowing how the human skeleton actually grows throughout this time period, the pattern at which individual bones grow, when those bones stop growing, we can actually establish the age at death of specific fossils, at least subadult fossils within the fossil record. However, this pattern of development is also an important evolutionary life history characteristic of our species. The fact that we spend so much time period in this pre-reproductive growing state suggests how much we really devote to our final adult selves and the complexity of that final adult self.